But we're going to start tonight with our eyes on Louisville, Kentucky. An all-night curfew has just gone into effect as of this hour, as of the last few seconds. That curfew comes at the end of a tense day in Louisville, which followed a tense summer in that city. There have been protests on the streets of Louisville, Kentucky for 119 consecutive days. Protests over the police killing of Breonna Taylor in March of this year, as Kentucky's Attorney General prepared today to announce whether there would be any charges brought against any of the officers involved. Much of downtown Louisville was closed off to vehicles, including with concrete jersey barriers. Storefronts were boarded up. A 3-night-long curfew was announced. The National Guard was deployed. It almost looks like the preparations for a hurricane or an impending flood. Tonight, there has been continued protest. There have been some arrests. Some protesters have set small fires. Police are out in large numbers, and we are receiving reports just in the last few minutes, preliminary reports that a police officer may have been shot in downtown Louisville. Our NBC affiliate in Louisville reporting tonight that an officer was shot around 8:30 p.m. tonight. We will bring you more information on that as we have it. We're going to be going to reporters live on the ground in just a moment. But all afternoon and evening, reporters on the ground in Louisville have said there is a palpable sense of anger and grief and disbelief there all these months into this controversy, after a grand jury indicted one of the 3 police officers involved in Breonna Taylor's death. That one officer was not charged for anything having to do with her death specifically. Former Louisville police officer Brett Hankison was charged with wanton endangerment. Wanton endangerment specifically of Breonna Taylor's neighbors, because, as the grand jury described, his indiscriminate shooting sent bullets flying into their apartment. So he's not charged with shooting Breonna Taylor. He's charged with endangering her neighbors by firing wildly into their apartment while this incident unfolded. Of the 6 bullets that hit Breonna Taylor, the investigation concluded that the fatal bullet came from the gun of one of the other 2 officers. Those other 2 officers, the investigation found, were justified in their deadly fire because Breonna Taylor's boyfriend fired at them first when the police broke down the door into that apartment. Now, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend maintains that the plainclothes police officers never identified themselves as police. He says that he and Ms. Taylor were woken from their bed. They thought their home was being invaded. That's why he fired. The officers insist they did knock and announce themselves as police. Today, Kentucky's Attorney General announced that his investigation had found one civilian witness who corroborated the officer's account that they announced themselves as police. This evening, Kentucky's governor publicly requested that the Attorney General make public as much evidence as possible from his investigation so the people of that state and the people of this country can see the evidence for themselves. As for Brett Hankison, the former officer who was indicted today, he was booked into jail at 4:30 this afternoon. 32 minutes later, he was released on $15,000 bond. When the grand jury decision was announced today, the Courier-Journal described the scene at Jefferson Square Park, where about 200 protesters had gathered to hear the announcement over a loudspeaker. They said, quote, as the decision concluded, there was confusion at first and then anger from those who had gathered. One woman asked, is that it? Protesters almost immediately began chanting, no justice, no peace. Several cried at the news of the grand jury's decision. One said, quote, I'm heartbroken. This is not a justice system if it's not for everybody. An attorney for Breonna Taylor's family, Benjamin Crump, called the grand jury decision today, quote, outrageous and offensive to Breonna Taylor's memory. He said, quote, if Brett Hankison's behavior was wanton endangerment to people in neighboring apartments, then it should have been wanton endangerment in Breonna Taylor's apartment, too. In fact, it should have been ruled wanton murder. We've just gotten this from a police spokesperson in Louisville. Police spokesperson in Louisville now saying that 2 officers have been shot in Louisville this evening and are in the hospital. We will bring you more details as we have them. I should tell you, we are expecting a press conference later this evening, but you're looking live at images from downtown Louisville right now. Joining us now is NBC News correspondent Cal Perry, who has been on the ground in Louisville covering this unfolding situation. Cal, what can you tell us about where you are and what you've seen tonight, what we should understand about how this is unfolding tonight?
We're here just outside Jefferson Square Park. I'll get out of the way and show you the line of police. Keep in mind, curfew technically started about 6 minutes ago. We got alerts on our phone that folks should start to head home, so this is about as close as we're going to get. We are about 0.8 of a mile from where that incident took place that we understand at least 2 police officers from LMPD were shot. We don't know the conditions. We know that they're at University of Louisville Hospital, and as you said, there will be a press conference, we understand, later. That news immediately changed the mood here. For about 2 hours, things were as they have been in the past. There was a lot of frustration, people very obviously upset, and there were minor clashes with police. I'm saying minor because we're talking about water bottles being thrown at police using those sort of small pepper ball rounds, and then as you can see here, there's a few minor fires. All of this a long way of saying that people here have been telling us tonight they do not believe that the law was designed to protect Breonna Taylor. Over 195 days of protests leading to tonight, and as you so laid out, no charges related directly to the Breonna Taylor shooting. We've heard from her family, who basically have called this a miscarriage of justice. They are very upset, the legal team as well, and we will have to see what that did, these 2 police being shot, and again, we don't know their conditions, what that does to this city. I can tell you, having reported here quite a bit, that it will likely be a turning point, that they will likely now enforce that curfew. And as you can see, the streets are almost completely empty of protesters. There was a few hundred people out here earlier, Rachel. They've basically gone home now.
And Cal, you mentioned that you're less than a mile from where we believe those officers were shot. Do we understand anything further about the circumstances of their shooting? Was that in an area where they were among protesters? Is there any information that we've been able to obtain, either from official sources or just from straight-out reporting, as to what may have occurred around the shooting of those officers? We have been told by a police spokesperson that both officers are at the hospital.
No further details. We know there were protests in the area, but we simply do not know what happened. I can tell you, and it's important to note, that there have been shootings here in the past during protests. About 6 months ago, there were 7 people shot in a mass shooting. There has been live gunfire in the past, but clearly 2 officers shot has the police force on edge. It has a city that was concerned about things turning violent, even more concerned now. And as we head later in the evening, again, I think the real question is, how strictly will they enforce the curfew? After Breonna Taylor was killed, there was a secondary incident. A few months later, David McAtee, a member of the community, was shot by the National Guard and the police as they moved through the city. That forced the governor to withdraw the National Guard. The National Guard disappeared from the city. LMPD disappeared from the city, and it really lowered the tensions here. Tonight, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing a ramping up of force and a show of force, as you can see behind me, by the Louisville police, Rachel.
And Cal, you talked about the enforcement of the curfew tonight and your expectations around that. As you mentioned, we're just a few minutes into the curfew by time. In terms of the empty streets near you, where you say there were several hundred protesters out there before, did police have to clear protesters from the streets in order to show us the kind of visuals that we've got right now from your shot? Or did protesters themselves withdraw as the clock struck the time that the curfew went into effect?
So at 8 p.m., 1 hour ago, there was an announcement made that it was an unlawful assembly over a loudspeaker by the police. And the thing that triggered that were these fires. There's some small fires here. There's another one behind you, Mark, on the other side. And once these small fires were lit, that was when the police decided to move in. They used some of those non-lethal pepper ball rounds, and they started to move the crowd. The crowd tried to set one of the buildings on fire. Everything in the downtown area is boarded up, and they tried to light some of those boards on fire. That was clearly a line that the police had laid down in their minds that they would step in and start to enforce. So at 8 p.m., they moved into this park. They started clearing it out. They used those flashbang grenades. They used some of that pepper spray, and the crowd sort of backed off. Once the word spread, again, that those officers were shot, and I think it spread pretty quickly, and again, it was about a mile from here, but this entire city is following one story, and they've been following one story for 194 days, and that's the story of Breonna Taylor. So word spread fast, and this area, which has kind of been demarcated barricaded by the police. I mean, there is a ring of dump trucks that is blocking off a 10 by 10 block radius. Once those police officers were shot, once that word spread, it was like everybody cleared out of this area, Rachel.
Cal Perry, I know you've been there many times over the last few months. Tonight is a night like no other. We'll be back with you as things evolve over the course of the night. Cal, thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
NBC News' Cal Perry for us in downtown Louisville. Again, we are following reports out of Louisville in the reaction to the news announced today that one officer will be charged in conjunction with the incident in which Breonna Taylor was killed by a police bullet. One officer will be charged. It is not a police officer who shot Breonna Taylor. He was charged with wanton endangerment for having fired wildly into Taylor's neighbor's apartment and endangering the people in that apartment. In the wake of that announcement, after months of nightly protests in Louisville calling for the charging of the officers who killed Breonna Taylor, we are, as you're seeing in these images, seeing a huge police presence in downtown Louisville. We have seen protesters out tonight. We have seen minor confrontations between police officers and protesters. But there is this late breaking news that we just got from a Louisville police spokesperson that two officers, under circumstances we cannot yet explain, two officers have been shot this evening and have gone to the hospital. Again, we do not know more about the circumstances of those officers being shot. We are expecting a live press conference, I would expect within this hour, but all eyes tonight on Louisville, Kentucky for all the obvious reasons. We're going to be keeping our eyes on Louisville tonight. We're covering a bunch of breaking stories tonight, including, as I mentioned, a statement from the White House this evening that is causing me to break my rule about covering only what the president does and not what he says. The president crossing a significant line in terms of our democracy and our status as a republic tonight. We've got more on that ahead. Stay with us.